All my life, I just wanted to be a writer. It's all I ever wanted to do. And when I was really young, I did it. I wrote poems and stories and plays. When I was 8 years old, I wrote a play for my class in primary school, and the teacher actually put it on. And 3 years later, I wrote another play, and the whole school put it on. So you can imagine I was pretty full of myself. I was this close to coming to school wearing a black polo neck and horn-rimmed spectacles. And then it all evaporated. It just stopped. By the time I got to secondary school, I was still a reader, but I wasn't a writer anymore. I just didn't do it. And when I look back now, I think that my lack of confidence stemmed from a fear of judgment. In a very strange way, I felt that not writing, but thinking that I might be good at it, was preferable to writing and maybe finding out that I wasn't good at it. And that state of affairs, that mindset, lasted for almost 25 years. I was in my mid-30s before I ever wrote another word. And the reason that I did finally become a writer, and that the reason I'm here now as a professional writer, is because of 3 conversations that I had in my life, and each of them was under 3 minutes long. And those conversations happened with 2 very close friends of mine, Adam and Tom. So let me tell you about the first one. I grew up in a place called Limavady in County Derry. My family lived there for 5 years, which is where I met Tom. And when he was in his late teens, he went to film school in New York, and he became a very successful film editor. He worked on Game of Thrones, lots of Hollywood movies, and big successful American TV shows. And by the time he was in his late 20s, he was married to Katie, and they'd had their first son, Owen. So at this point, I had been an investigative journalist for the BBC for several years. I was in my early 30s. It was a job I loved. It had excitement, adventure, and I had convinced myself that this is what I wanted to do with my life. But there was a little voice in my head always saying to me, you should write something creatively. And I still just couldn't do it. Tom calls me up one day and says, my son Owen is getting christened. We'd like you to be the godfather. Will you come to New York? And so I did. I flew to New York. And looking back, there's a part of me that wonders whether Tom knew that there was a moment where he wanted to have a conversation with me. On the second night in Brooklyn, in New York, in his living room, he put on a short film, because that's the kind of thing that he loved to do. He was a film editor. He loved to watch short films and feature films. And we watched a short film called Bullet in the Brain by a writer-director called David Van Anken. And I was completely transported by it. I was just blown away. It was only 13 minutes long, but it had so much intellectual rigor, so much emotion, so much to it, that I asked Tom immediately, can we just watch that again? And he looked at me out of the side of his eye and he smiled, and we did. And the second time the credits rolled, Tom said to me, I think you should do that. And I said, do what? And he said, I think you should write a short film, or a TV show, or longer films. I think you'd be really good at it. And I almost, and possibly did, burst out laughing. I just thought this was preposterous. I didn't know anything about screenwriting. I think I went to the fridge to get a beer and tried to change the subject, and I prevaricated and hesitated. But I couldn't get what he'd said out of my mind. I thought about it on the plane home, and the other thing he gave me to take home with me was a DVD copy of that short film, Bullet in the Brain. He put something in here. Now, at this point, back in Belfast, I was working with a very talented young producer-director called Adam Patterson. He had just moved from being a full-time professional photographer to being a documentary filmmaker. We worked together a lot here in Northern Ireland and also abroad, and I found his company and his conversation really stimulating. He was a pure filmmaker. He loved cameras, he loved color, he loved framing shots. And I find this very exciting. This is a picture of Adam. It's not a very good picture, and that's why I chose it. So Adam and I worked together, and a few months after I'd come back from New York, it was a very hot summer in Belfast, and there was a lot of rioting going on in North Belfast, and Adam and I were covering it, making a documentary film about it. And one night after a particularly difficult and quite violent day, we went back to his apartment to kind of decompress. We were full of adrenaline and absolutely exhausted. And Adam said, "Let's have a whiskey." This is what that looked like. So we were having our whiskey, and I caught out of the side of my eye a picture, or I saw my knapsack sitting in the corner, and I said to him, because the DVD's still in there, and I said, "Do you want to watch a short film?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So we put on the short film, Bullet in the Brain, and we watch it, and we talk about it afterwards, and he's really into it and talking about how great it is and how the shots are framed and how the story's told. And then came the second conversation that changed my life, because I echoed Tom's words from New York, and I said, "I think we should do that." And unlike me, instead of prevaricating and hesitating, Adam just looked at me and said, "When do you want to start?" And we started writing the very next day. And to both of us, it felt like a valve had been turned on. It was the start of a very long journey. The first thing we wrote was a short film called Rough, based on the idea of so-called punishment attacks in Belfast, these paramilitary-style attacks. But that was just the tap turning on. Then we wrote a TV pilot, we wrote a feature film, we wrote 2 more pilots, and we had kind of started. By day, we were still journalists and documentary makers, but by night, we were writing together, and it felt like everything had changed. So it was the start of a long journey, but eventually we got some traction and things started to change. And this is the day we signed with our agent in London, that's Camille, and we felt like a couple of kings because we finally had an agent. We had many years left to go of trial and error and failure, but we were really getting somewhere. That conversation with Tom and the second conversation with Adam had done something quite profound to both of us. And then I got a call from New York. Tom's wife, Katie, who was 32, was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. And I went back to New York a few months later for Katie's funeral. And the only thing I can say about Katie really is she was the best one of all of us. So during those horrible days of the funeral, Tom pulled me aside and said, I can't stay in New York and I can't keep being an editor. By now he had 2 boys, Owen and almost a newborn infant, Luke, and he said, I have to come home. I can't be here, I can't work, I need support. And so he basically devoted himself, he came home, he bought a house in Limavady and devoted himself solely for the next few years to bringing up his 2 boys. He didn't edit again. He just became a full-time dad, which obviously was far more important than any filmmaking or writing or editing. And that's the decision he made, and it was the right one. Adam and I, a couple of years after that, had our first big break. We had a show commissioned for the BBC called The Salisbury Poisonings, and we would go down and visit Tom and watch films with him. And the irony wasn't lost on us that the man who had started our career had given up his own. And because we'd had a green light and a commission, suddenly people were coming to us to say, what do you want to do next? So Adam and I got together and we said, what we want to do next is make the short film that Tom inspired us to write 8 years ago. And so we dug it out and we polished it and we rewrote it, and we found an amazing producer called Louise Gallagher who spoke to someone called Roma Downey in LA who fully financed it, along with Northern Ireland Screen. And Adam and I found ourselves directing on our first set, and the short film Rough, that had been 8 years in the making, we were finally making it. And then it was time, we knew, for one more conversation. So we went to Limavady and we sat down with Tom and we said, we want you to edit this. And he said, no, I can't. It's been 8 years since I've cut anything. I've probably forgotten how to edit. And we said, no, you are an editor. That's who you are in your heart. You can do this. And he said, no, I can't practically do it. I can't leave the boys. I can't come to Belfast and sit in an edit suite for weeks. And we said, okay, what about we come to you? We'll build an edit suite in your living room, and we'll do it here. And that's exactly what we did. That's Tom working on it in his living room. Adam and I would leave Belfast at 6 or 7 at night after work, drive to Limavady, and work with him from maybe 8 o'clock until 2 or 3 in the morning, and then drive back up the road. And Tom hadn't forgotten how to edit. He did the most amazing job, and the film won 8 awards internationally and at home, including an IFTA award for Best Short Film. And I like to think that in that final conversation, when he had told us about who we are or who we might become, that we repaid the favor and that Tom remembered who he was. Now, we didn't immediately coax him out of retirement. He's still in Limavady. His boys are older now, but he's still looking after them. But the conversation with him has changed. We're constantly talking about when he's going to come back and do his next project and how he's going to work with us, either as an editor or as a storyteller or in some way. And he has a vision for his future. So here's my takeaway. The conversations that really, really change your life are not long. They just have to remind you of who you are. Thank you.